Alrighty, now we're going to jump into the Game Master Soapbox. And in this section, I want to talk about something I find very effective, and that is finding ways to empower your players in your game session. Because when you do so, you take the burden off of yourself to handle the story development and make the game, if nothing else, at least feel more under the control of the player. You see, the balance of power is not between governments and governance. Those can be at war for decades or even centuries without any kind of an outcome, really, because the economics of warfare tend to be pretty close to onerous. But the advantage that the players can have in a campaign and the ability for them to become the deal makers and king namers just simply increases over time. So just realize that the balance of power is actually at the tabletop within the PCs and their non-enjoined equivalences. They have the ability to wage war, to prevent war, etc., etc. And this powerhouse is actually defined more closely as the personalities of the players, because it's their choice and their will that will ultimately provide the triggering force for any of those kind of decisions. So for this sake, what we want to do is talk about the first thing we have to realize is that in an early story with new players, the game master's storyboarding and railroading of the players can be essential for them to start to develop their own ideas and their own mechanisms. But the empowering of the players is going to start with disconnecting the story's locomotive. Whatever it was that was driving the players to this point needs to become obviated. Either it's eliminated because they ran out of whatever it was, or they've abandoned that location for another and no longer have resource. The idea of disconnecting the engine, and those of you that are from Nykos already know where I'm going on this, but the establishment of these items as reliquaries or trigger points certainly can remain, but they have to be disconnected as the story drivers for the stories to become unique and player-driven. And the reason to do this is that there is an increasing power that the players develop when they actually have the tools and the knowledge and the skill level, not to mention, in the case of Dungeons & Dragons, the ridiculously large pool of hit points that allows them to start to develop the power of restraint, that they literally choose to not get involved in things and thereby become the essential kingmakers. The disconnection of that power source, therefore, is critical, because the players have to have already brought themselves to the point of understanding what that restraint means in order to understand how really effective they can be at changing the world. And I think that's one of the elements, if I had to point to it, one of the key elements of role-playing games is the ability to change the world. In modern stories and in historical stories, players very rarely have any influence on the overall story unless it's a fabrication, because we as human beings want there to be a way to change our world. And so therefore, in a fantasy setting, they certainly can, because they have the power to. It's just a matter of them learning from their mistakes. And this is critical for a game master with a games group who is finally being cut loose, is you have to allow them to make mistakes. Perhaps they back a non-winner. Perhaps they get thwarted by somebody who knows more than they do. All of these elements should be there not to undermine or destroy the player's will, but instead to give them chances to build up their abilities. And only way we really learn is by making mistakes. Now that means that you as a storyteller really need to develop the skills of situational scale. How many people is a mob? How much of a mob is inexorable? And how do you keep the players from being summarily executed by a group that don't agree with them. Because you have to realize and expect that every group that you play will eventually fail badly at least once in a while. So you have to play like a thinker and think like a player, because you have to find ways to justify and explain the course of the adventures in such a way that it's not perceived that you are cheating the system. And I'll flat out state that if you as a game master have to cheat to get things to be accomplished in your story, you might be doing something wrong. Because if you've built the engine properly, when it comes to those die rolls, you won't have to make them. Also realize that you need to give time and effort to players as they succeed in order to celebrate their wins, so that it won't go to their heads. They need to understand the great respect and great honor that they earn by doing the right thing, and feed those successful encounters with plenty of rewards so that they see the overall value of them. But of course, beyond all of this, you have to make sure you maximize the fun in all game aspects. If a player isn't having fun, the game master is going to have a problem in the short term or in the long term. So it's better to try to maximize the fun for everybody at all levels throughout this process. Even as you're empowering your players, you have to realize that they also are human beings as well.